Yo, this week I'm going to be doing another Tales of the TMNT. It's going to be Mystic Mikey. It's going to join his brothers here. I need to make these wood pieces of armor that he has out of wood. Well, let's get into it. I'm going to switch to time lapse so we can get through this in an orderly manner. So I'm going to start out with his weapons. I have this bamboo skewer and I just cut two sticks out of it. And I use scissors. I go around slowly and then finally cut through to have a sharper edge. Now I have Apoxie Sculpt. I got two about the same size pieces. I stretch them out to about the shape that I want. And then I use my X-Acto knife and I'm wetting the blade before I cut so that I can get some nice clean sharp lines on it. Then with the wet blade I peel it off the bottom and I just stick the stick onto it. And then smooth that out with the knife and water. I cut a notch out of one of them. And then I have two little pieces that I'm just wrapping around the top side because that's how it's going to stay together and not fall off. Now with the Apoxie Sculpt, I'm making the bark for his armor. And so I'm using an old like my Donatello staff, and it has wood grain on it, so I'm just rolling over that with water to get some of the wood grain texture. And then I have the shape underneath the parchment paper that I'm using, so I'm just cutting little slits, and two of them that go on his shoulders go on the top. They have branches coming out, so I added those. Now I'm cutting for his feet pads, and I'm using the knife now to just cut some small lines and definition in to make it look more like bark. I left a lot of this in. I think it was pretty easy to do and came out pretty cool in the end. Apoxie Sculpt takes 24 hours to dry, so that's why I do this first. And then he's got for his wrist, forearm trees, and one of them's different. Now to get the bandana off, you just twist them around and it'll pop off. Then I sand off the top of the bandana. He's got a full top of the head mask instead of just the over the eyes. Now I'm sanding everything, I guess, using a nail file, and I used my cordless Dremel. Now I'm using that again. I'm getting the inside to give a curve to the inside of his armor. I do that for a while. I don't show as much of this part. So that's what I'm going for. Now he's got a hole in the back of his head, so I put some super glue and then just some little scraps of EVA foam. I want it to stay soft in there for what I'm going to do later. Now it's time to cover him with a matte acrylic varnish, and this is just going to work as my primer so that all the rest of the paint will stick to him nicely and it'll be all ready to go. Now I have a burnt umber for all the tree parts, well, all the tree trunks except for one of them. Oh, that was the back I did. So one of them's not going to be that color, but then I dry brushed a little onto the pole of the weapon, and now I have a toothpick just to get in the cracks of his shell there and all the cuts and little holes that he has. Now I'm doing the top side with the burnt umber, and the pointy one, it's like a younger tree and it's got some moss on it I'll get to, but I use a raw sienna for that particular one. And then also I'm dry brushing onto his chest now with the same raw sienna, and I go back with the burnt umber and I'm getting all the cracks in the back of his shell and then just spreading it out everywhere, but want to get the most darkest in the grooves and cracks. Now I went with a hunter green for this. It's more black in the cartoon, but I didn't want a jet black, and then I thought I'll mix black with green, but then I thought that'll still be black, and I just went with the hunter green because that's what I was going to use for the moss on his forearm armor tree bark. Yeah. That was all four of them. But now I have daffodil yellow, and I'm dry brushing that mainly on his shell, but I'm going pretty much everywhere. It's okay. I'm going to paint everywhere, and then having the different colors of green and yellow, when I put the next green on, it'll have variations in his skin tone. But then they'd never paint the back of the knee pads strap, so I added that with the burnt umber, and now I dry brush a little more of the daffodil yellow on all the bark. And next I have a cinnamon brown. I'm going to go over all his pads with the cinnamon brown because I want them to be a little lighter. I'm still going to hit them with a bit of dry brushing later to lighten them up even more, and then I dry brush a little on the shell and his belt and that bark. Now I moved to a parchment white. It's just an off-white because I don't want it to be super bright white. And his leg wraps are all white, and then his pads I'm just dry brushing the white on there to make them look dusty. And now, bring out all the details in the bark, I dry brush white onto the bark, well, the parchment white, so off-white. But that makes all the details pop out on the bark because it just sticks to the edges by going with just a little bit on the brush and spreading it as much as you can. Now I have silver and the small detail I got with a toothpick, and then I have a brush. And I'm not really soaking it, I'm just kind of dry brushing it on, but I want to cover it pretty much everywhere, lightly. I chose grass green for his main green color, and it's just a little brighter and greener than the color he was, but then I added the yellow, so that'll make it a little more yellowy green like he is in the cartoon. But you'll see variations in color, so it'll look more natural. I put the belt on and it like clips in, but it wasn't sticking, so I had to use some super glue. And now all the painting on him is done, so I cover everything with a matte acrylic varnish, and that'll protect it so it won't get scratched or anything when I start to put them together. And for his mask, I'm doing the whole thing with a hockey stick tape. It's a fabric tape, so it works great for stuff like this. And I just pull it back as much as I can and wrap it up. But now, since I left it soft in that hole in his head, I cut some wires that's going to be for the bandana straps. But first I put a little bit of the tape as wraps on his weapons. Now I have a suede lace that I'm using just so his weapons can fit into his belt. And so the wires I cut is just a craft aluminum wire, and I fold the piece of hockey stick tape over it, and the wire is like half the size, so I want it to dangle, but it doesn't really because it's so thick, the hockey stick tape. Then I use a little more tape to wrap them together. Now I move on to orange, finally, for Mikey to paint his mask. I'm using two different orange. I'm kind of going back and forth just to get some variations in colors because his mask looks old and dusty in the episodes, and so I'm trying to replicate that with the lighter, more yellower orange, and then the brighter, darker, more red orange. Now this was really tough. I used a combination X-Acto knife and a couple different scissors till I eventually cut out around his eyes, because I left that till the end because I didn't want to get paint in there. But I ended up with a lot of knife scratches in there, so I had to paint the inside of the eyes white. And then I took a picture and it looked a little like the eyes were too close to the mask, so I had to add some more orange around the mask and bring out some details in the weapons. I do a black wash. That's just black acrylic paint and water, and you just want to kind of get some on there. And I go back again with the hot saffron, which was the darker orange, and I'm dry brushing a little more. And by dry brushing, then the white still shows through. That's Playmates one. It's actually probably the best one they did out of the four, but mine I think is still better because theirs is still kind of sucks. But that's the other two brothers. Raph is mad because he doesn't have a cool costume yet. That'll be next week. So until then, remember, always keep your head up. Thanks for watching. Peace.